When was the last time your buyer was actually in the room when you made a decision about them? Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Jasmine. This podcast exists because that question matters more than most marketing teams realize. Let's get into it.
Hi, Jasmine.
Hey, Matt. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Just going into yet another heat wave, so that's fun. But other than that, it's all good.
Yeah, well, lots of popsicles to stay cool.
Absolutely. I guess it's time to turn the temperature up on a splice of life science marketing. So today, I wanted to talk about one of the blogs that you wrote a week or so ago, and it was about business cases. And I know from my experience, business cases is as much a political task as it is a financial one. In your blog, you talk about the business case that refuses to die and the process where you've been asked to rebuild the business case several times. The customer conversations go really, really well. The bottom-up numbers finally clear that bar on attempt number 3, and people are kind of ready to believe everything. But you ask the question, why does this feel like you're polishing a tombstone? You said that here's the diagnosis that nobody says out loud in those meetings. And it's mostly because it's a little embarrassing. Most teams don't actually have a kill problem, and they don't have a funding problem either. They have a problem telling the difference between a project that's genuinely dead and one that's just early. From the outside, these look identical. The uncomfortable part, you say, is that most organizations are built to never find out which one they're looking at. Stage gate kill rates run lower than the actual data on project outcomes should justify, which means the whole system quietly rewards stubbornness over honesty. That's a line I love. So let's ask the person who spent years inside our RUO innovation pipelines watching this exact slow motion car crash. Jasmine, how do you actually tell a dead business case from one that's just a bit early?
Yeah, this one's really near and dear to my heart. Like you, I have lots of examples and have lived through lots of these situations, and also have very few examples of killing a business case. So, what I have recommended is that you run 3 tests before you let yourself touch the model again. So the first one is the gap in your data objective, or what's called epistemic. This objective means the data genuinely can't exist yet at this stage. And that's fine. That goes in an assumption log, and you move on with your life. Epistemic means that your team just hasn't asked the right question yet, which is completely different and far more annoying to fix.
And then the second test?
Run the business case against your most resistant buyer, not your favorite cheerleader. And this is an important distinction. We use a synthetic buyer panel for this, built from existing voice of customer data and persona work, and you deliberately point it at the buyer with zero appetite to switch. A team building an automated sample prep platform, for example, asked their synthetic buyer panel what would stop adoption even with the great throughput data. The core facility director persona came back, and this is a persona that's built into the synthetic panel, with something that the team hadn't modeled at all: concordance data. Proving the new method matches their validated one before they're allowed to publish results from their own researchers. That's 3 to 6 months and headcount they don't have. The instrument got priced, the actual cost of adoption, it didn't.
So that's really interesting. So the cost of switching could be the biggest pain point.
Correct. And it's often not incorporated in a business model.
That reminds me of a business case when I was studying for my MBA. The professor of innovation back then was Professor Keith Goffin, and he'd come out of HP and he did a lot of work with Agilent around the time that Waters launched ultra performance chromatography. So we're talking it's a few years ago now. But what was really interesting was that you would think from the outside that a way of slashing the time to get to an analysis to 1/10 of the time, everybody would say, this is fantastic, let's do it. But as you say, that cost of adoption, the cost of method transfer, specifically in those places where the validity of the data, the concordance data was really important, which is where these workhorses would sit, actually meant that people weren't willing to switch because it meant revalidating entire processes. And that was just so much human work that even if they saved time, it didn't actually save them time personally. It wasn't worth it. It was cheaper for them to just buy an extra couple of instruments and sacrifice the bench space. And so it was really interesting seeing that switch. Now, of course, over time that switch happened and people were able to look at, well, we can do this quicker and the whole field moved on. But it was really interesting looking at distinction between those that really needed that concordance data and that cost of switching versus those that were quite happy just to adopt straight away and could be early adopters, which were tended to be more the research labs.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
lot to dig into there because early adopters are a completely different cohort than the middle majority. And I think those two aspects or persona types need to be factored into business cases more often than not. So that's part one. Part two, I think that there's an emotional component, not just a logistic component to new innovation. And that emotional component is, will I be successful? The famous nobody ever got fired for buying IBM or life sciences. They used to say that about applied biosystems. And it's that emotional component that also has to have a line item in the business case as well, because that will change the shape of the adoption curve.
And just to add to that, it's really interesting, but we become weirdly fond of the workarounds. So if something doesn't quite do what we want it to do, but we figure out how to get the instrument or the reagents to do something they weren't perfectly designed to do, but it's within spec, that's then our IP, that we feel special doing that. And if all of a sudden there's a little part, it's a little death, isn't it? That just sort of happens. Oh, we've killed that one then. And so again, I think there's that not developed here kind of process that can happen as well. But you
Agreed.
mentioned the third test as well.
So, whether it's a product problem or a timing problem, and these two wear the exact same disguise sometimes, voice of customer confirms real pain, but not real urgency. Early adopters can't produce reference customers. The market needs 18 to 24 months to catch up to you. That's not a reason to kill the business case. That's a reason to table it with an actual date stapled to it, not a vague, we'll revisit it someday. And so this is the same issue we were just discussing about considering that chasm, as Jeffrey Moore talks about, between those early adopters and the early and middle majority. And that has to be factored into the business case.
From your experience, how do you go about architecting the journey from these early adopters? How do we get the evidence that's needed? Because often it's not necessarily that the product itself needs to change, but it's the evidence base around it. How do you go about architecting that evidence base to help that early and late majority?
Yeah, a lot of it comes back to your voice of customer, comes back to really digging into identifying the problem that that particular product, workflow, software, service is meant to solve. And really listening intently for sort of the unspoken problems that they're having. So that's part one. The other part is ethnographic research, which I think in the life sciences tools industry is really, really underutilized as a super valuable way to understand the current state of what people are doing and not even realizing what problems they have. So ethnographic research is where you go into a lab and actually watch several users, several researchers perform a particular workflow. and observe how they're moving through the workflow. Have they created their own workarounds, as you stated earlier, and how they're using and interacting with the platform to achieve their ultimate outcome of data?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? When I was still in industry, I led a big e-commerce transformation. And some of the ethnographic research we did there uncovered probably the most powerful insight that we had. But people were placing orders for oligonucleotides, complex strings of letters. At least that's how the people that were tasked with placing those orders, because they weren't scientists, they saw them as this big challenge and they had to copy and paste things from one cell in an Excel sheet to another. And they knew that if they got just one letter wrong, the whole system broke. They'd order the wrong product, the wrong thing would arrive. They wouldn't know that they'd order the wrong thing until a certain amount of time later. And then it wouldn't work. So it wasn't just the cost of ordering and having somebody make the wrong thing. It was then the delay to being able to issue the next batch. So there was an awful lot of stress and emotion tied up in this. And so one of the key insights was that every order was a little packet of emotions because people found it so stressful. So what we had to do is we had to turn that stress into joy. And there was a simple fix for that, which was actually turning things into a way of being able to simply reorder based on essentially a product code, which sounds simple, and it is, but it's amazing how many people don't take that approach. And this isn't for your average research order. This is for those going into diagnostics and areas where it's really, really vitally important to have the right thing every time. And so it really did become a really, really interesting project. And I never would have thought that standing next to somebody placing an order, you would have seen just how stressed they got. Like, that shouldn't be the case. We need to make it easy for people to purchase from us. The customer was horrible. Fortunately, we were able to do something about that. But without ethnography, we wouldn't have known those problems were happening.
It's a great example, and it's amazing how big an aha moment a marketer or a product marketer could have from that simple research.
So I can hear a lot of product managers yelling at their car speakers right now or saying, this is just more process. We have stage gates, finance reviews. Now we need to add synthetic buyer panels. Isn't this just another checkpoint number that nobody asked for and is going to listen to?
So I'll take that one very seriously because, in my experience, it isn't additive, it's a replacement. It replaces the part of the process that's already broken, which is rebuilding the finance model a third and a fourth time, hoping, and as many of us have heard, hope is not a strategy, hoping the inputs land somewhere more flattering. The synthetic panel test in the example took an afternoon and surfaced six-figure adoption costs nobody had priced. Comparing that finding in a failed launch 18 months from now in front of your entire leadership team, that process isn't longer. It's a way to keep the customer in the room and really avoid downstream, more costly issues.
I got another question, and I wonder if this picks a hole in the framework. If somebody's built this careful, tidy distinction between killing something and tabling it, but what does table really mean? Isn't that almost the single easiest way for an organization to never really kill anything ever again? You just sort of put a vague re-entry trigger on a thing and a nice round date. Yeah, let's look at it again, Q1 2027. And then nobody revisits it because the person who changed it or tabled it has maybe changed roles or moved on. And so nobody doesn't really want to have that next meeting and find out that it's actually been killed because, hey, it's easier to go, oh, well, this is in the pipeline. It's just not ready yet. Maybe even customers prefer to hear it's in the pipeline. It's just not being worked on yet.
You're right. It can be a way of kicking the can down the road and not making a firm decision. Nothing in the framework enforces that on its own. The diagnostic tells you which decision you're facing. It doesn't make the organization show up on a specific date. What's supposed to happen is someone outside the project owns that re-entry trigger, not the product manager who tabled it. So there's no built-in incentive to let it quietly expire in a drawer somewhere. So often what I've seen is you have a portfolio management team and it's someone other than the product manager on that team who is responsible for this. But plenty of organizations don't build that ownership in, and a lot of tabled cases just fade out slowly instead of a clean break point. Yes, we're gonna revisit this on this specific date at this specific meeting. And that's actually the worst outcome because a slow fade teaches nobody anything, and there's no improvement in the process that way, which is ultimately the goal.
Interesting. A final query here. The synthetic customer panel that you mentioned runs on your own voice of customer data. And so it's information you've already collected, but there's always that garbage in, garbage out argument. How do you know that the panel isn't just confirming whatever the team has already wanted to believe?
Yeah, confirmation bias absolutely is a thing in what we do. And that's precisely why you point it at the most resistant persona in the synthetic panel, not the one who's easiest to please. Run it against your biggest fan, and sure, you're just going to get more confirmation bias. Pointing it at the QC director with a validated workflow and zero patience for revalidation costs is what forces out a real objection instead of a comfortable one. It's only as good as the underlying VOC, of course, and completely no argument there. But a few hours of stress testing against imperfect data is still a lot less expensive than building a whole financial model on top of it and finding out the hard way in a gate review.
That's fair. So let's say that I'm a product manager and I'm convinced by all the arguments you've put forward today. When I'm in work on Monday morning with a case that I'm already nervous about, what's my first move?
So, name what uncertainty type you're actually dealing with before you touch the model again. That self-awareness is super important. Objective, epistemic, or your own attachment to the outcome. Product managers are human. That emotion is real as well. Say that word of uncertainty out loud, even if it's a little uncomfortable. Most people skip straight to rebuilding the spreadsheet. A lot of product managers, me included, are very type A, let's just get it done, without ever renaming which problem they're actually solving. So it's really understanding what that uncertainty type is number one.
Okay, and what's the second thing that we need to look at then?
Again, before you rebuild the case a third, a fourth time, run it against your most resistant buyer persona first. Even if you don't have a synthetic customer panel built, hopefully you do have a resistant buyer persona from the VOC that you did yourself or that you had a market research firm do, and put yourself in that resistant buyer persona's shoes. Whatever objections show up there should change the model. It should not get quietly patched around.
And what's the question that cuts across this entire conversation then?
What's the actual evidence, not the story you've been telling yourself? Keep in mind that we are marketing to the most skeptical audience on the planet, as Hamid, Ganadan, and others have said. And it's really that basis of evidence that's super important to turn that skepticism around. What is the evidence that would make you kill this case today? If you can't answer that in one sentence, you don't really have a business case yet. You have a narrative you've repeated to yourself enough times that it started to sound like data. So those are the three actions I would suggest a product manager take next week.
Nice. So thank you for that really helpful conversation. The full piece is called When to Walk Away, Kill the Business Case, or just table it. And it's published on striven.com. And we'll have the links in the show notes.
And if you want help running this diagnostic on your own pipeline, including the synthetic buyer panel part, Striven offers a free 30-minute Persona AI consultation. There's no obligation, and you'll leave with concrete next steps either way.
Tabling a case with a real owner and real data is discipline. Tabling it with neither is just a kill decision hiding in a hoodie.
So kill it clean or table it with precision. Either one beats rebuilding it a fourth time and calling that a strategy.
And most importantly, kill the project if you have to, not the product manager.
I appreciate that one the most. Thanks, Matt.
Anytime. Great to speak to you today. Thanks, Jasmine.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to A Splice of Life Science Marketing. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
If this conversation helped you, the single biggest way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave a review on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it, and it makes a huge difference.
You can find out more about us and the topics we discuss at striven.com or on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening. We hope to see you next time.